In 1965, the Kansas City Athletics sent a 59-year-old man to the pitcher's mound to face the Boston Red Sox. He pitched 3 innings, gave up 1 hit, 0 runs. The batter who got the hit, Carl Yastrzemski, was 25 years old. The pitcher was Satchel Paige. He had started his professional career in 1926. That was 39 years earlier. He had pitched in 5 different decades. He had won an estimated 2,000 games. Joe DiMaggio called him the toughest pitcher he ever faced. Dizzy Dean said his own fastball looked like a change of pace next to Satchel's, and he had not been allowed to pitch in the major leagues until he was 42 years old because of the color of his skin. When reporters asked him how a 59-year-old could still get major leaguers out, Paige shrugged. "Age is a case of mind over matter," he said. "If you do not mind, it does not matter." This is the story of the greatest pitcher most of America never got to see. The man who was too old when they finally let him in and still too good for anyone to get out. This is the story of Satchel Paige. Leroy Robert Paige was born on July 7, 1906, in Mobile, Alabama. At least, that is what his birth certificate says. The truth is, nobody was ever completely sure when Satchel Paige was born, including Satchel himself. Some records suggest he may have been born as early as 1899. His mother's family Bible supposedly held the answer, but as Paige wrote in his autobiography, "Seems like Mum's Bible would know, but she ain't ever shown me the Bible." The mystery around his age became one of the great running jokes of his career. He loved it. "How old would you be?" he once asked. "If you did not know how old you are." What is certain is that he grew up poor. His father John was a gardener. His mother Lula was a washerwoman who scrubbed clothes for white families to feed her children. Leroy was the 7th of 11 kids, raised in a shotgun shack in the Down the Bay neighborhood of Mobile. It was the same neighborhood where, 28 years later, another baseball legend named Hank Aaron would be born. At age 7, Leroy went to work at the Mobile train station, carrying passengers' luggage for tips. The job paid almost nothing, so the boy rigged up a system. He attached ropes to his shoulders and waist, and carried a satchel in each hand and one under each arm. He hauled so many bags at once that his friends said he looked like a walking satchel tree. The nickname stuck. From that day forward, Leroy Paige was Satchel. School held no interest for him. He skipped classes constantly. When he was not at the train station, he was throwing rocks at tin cans, at fence posts, at anything that moved. He had a natural arm, loose and whip-like, and his accuracy was frightening. He could hit a target from distances that amazed the older boys in the neighborhood. But Satchel was also getting into trouble. He shoplifted. He stole from the train station. He ran with a rough crowd. 2 weeks before his 12th birthday, he was arrested for stealing and sentenced to the Alabama Reform School for Juvenile Negro Law-Breakers at Mount Meigs. He would spend the next 5.5 years locked up. The Alabama Reform School for Juvenile Negro Law-Breakers was exactly what it sounded like: a prison for black children in the segregated South. The conditions were harsh. The discipline was strict. Satchel was told he would not see freedom again until he was 18 years old. It was the worst thing that ever happened to him, and also the best. At Mount Meigs, a coach named Edward Byrd noticed the tall, skinny kid with the rubber arm. Byrd was the school's baseball coach, and he saw something in Satchel that no one had ever bothered to develop. For the first time in Satchel's life, someone taught him the fundamentals of pitching. Byrd showed him how to grip the ball, how to use his long legs and arms to generate power, how to control his delivery instead of just throwing as hard as he could. He taught him to think on the mound, to set up hitters, to use his brain as much as his arm. Satchel had an anatomy that was all up and down. He was 6'3" and weighed barely 140 pounds. His arms were impossibly long, his legs were like stilts. When he wound up and delivered the ball, his arm came whipping forward like a buggy whip. The combination of his height, his arm length, and his natural flexibility created a delivery that hitters simply could not read. Paige later said, You might say I traded 5 years of freedom to learn how to pitch. It was the only good thing about those years. But it changed everything. When he was released around 1923 or 24, Satchel was a different person. He was tall, lanky, and armed with a fastball that nobody in Mobile had ever seen before. He joined the semi-professional Mobile Tigers and dominated local competition for 2 years. In 1926, the Chattanooga Black Lookouts of the Negro Southern League offered him his first professional contract. The salary was $50 per month. Satchel did not care about the money. "I would have played for nothing," he said. "That is how much I loved baseball." He was 20 years old, and his legend was about to begin. Satchel Paige arrived in professional baseball at a time when America was rigidly segregated. Black players were banned from the major leagues by an unwritten rule that had existed since the 1880s. They played in the Negro Leagues, a parallel world of baseball that operated in the shadows of the white game. The stadiums were smaller, the travel was brutal, with players crammed into buses that drove through the night from city to city, often unable to find hotels or restaurants that would serve black customers. The pay was terrible compared to what white major leaguers earned, but the talent was extraordinary. Some of the greatest athletes in American history played in the Negro Leagues, invisible to the white sporting press and unknown to most white fans. After a brief stint in Chattanooga, Paige joined the Birmingham Black Barons of the Negro National League in 1927. The owner, R.T. Jackson, quickly realized what he had. Paige was an immediate sensation. His fastball was unlike anything hitters had ever seen. It exploded out of his hand with a whip-like delivery, his long arm coming from impossible angles. Batters could hear it hiss as it crossed the plate. Within 2 years, he set the Negro League single-season strikeout record with 184, and struck out 17 batters in a single game. Jackson began renting Paige out to other teams around the league. Whenever a team needed a big draw, they borrowed Satchel. His name on a marquee guaranteed a full stadium. Word spread quickly across the Negro League world and beyond. Satchel Paige was not just good, he was otherworldly. In 1931, he joined the Pittsburgh Crawfords, a team that owner Gus Greenlee was assembling into one of the greatest rosters in Negro League history. The Crawfords featured Josh Gibson, the power-hitting catcher known as the Black Babe Ruth, and Cool Papa Bell, the outfielder who was so fast that Paige himself joked he could flip the light switch and be in bed before the room got dark. With Satchel on the mound, Gibson behind the plate, and Bell in center field, the Crawfords became the most feared team in black baseball. But Paige was not just dominant, he was a showman. He understood that baseball was entertainment, and he turned every appearance into an event that fans would talk about for years. He would call his outfielders to the dugout, leaving only his catcher on the field, and then strike out the side. He would deliberately load the bases so he could pitch to Josh Gibson with everything on the line, just to prove he could get the greatest hitter in the Negro Leagues out. He named his pitches like characters in a story. The B-ball was his fastball. The hesitation pitch was his changeup, where he would pause mid-delivery and freeze the batter. He called others the Bat Dodger, the Midnight Rider, and Long Tom. In 1934, he faced Slim Jones in a game at Yankee Stadium that is still considered the greatest game in Negro League history. The two pitchers dueled for 10 innings before darkness ended the game in a 1-1 tie. By the mid-1930s, Satchel Paige was the biggest draw in black baseball. His salary rose to $600 per month, the highest in the Negro Leagues. Teams rented him out for individual games because his name alone could fill a stadium. He barnstormed constantly, sometimes pitching 3 games in a single week, driving from city to city across the country. Paige even played for a white semi-professional team in Bismarck, North Dakota, during breaks from the Crawfords. He was credited with winning 134 of 150 games he pitched there. In 1936, back with the Crawfords, he went 24-3. Nobody could touch him. The white baseball world took notice. After the Negro League season ended each year, black and white players would face each other in barnstorming exhibitions across the country. These games were unofficial, but they were the only way to compare talent across the color line. Dizzy Dean, one of the best pitchers in the major leagues, faced Paige in these exhibitions and said afterward, "My fastball looks like a change of pace alongside that little pistol bullet Satchel shoots up to the plate." Joe DiMaggio called Paige the toughest pitcher he had ever faced. Bob Feller, the Cleveland Indians' fireballing ace, barnstormed extensively with Paige after the 1946 season. When Feller and Paige traveled together, they sold out major league stadiums across the country. White fans who had never seen a Negro League game came out by the thousands to watch Paige pitch. Everyone who faced him agreed. Satchel Paige would have been a star in the major leagues. He might have been the greatest pitcher in major league history. But the color line remained, and every year that passed was another year stolen from his prime. Paige himself rarely spoke about the injustice. He dealt with racism the way he dealt with everything else, with humor and with his arm. When asked if he was bitter about being excluded from the majors, he typically deflected with a joke or a philosophical observation. But those who knew him understood the pain beneath the smile. But none of it mattered. The color line held. Satchel Paige could not pitch in the major leagues because he was black. And by the time the barrier finally fell, he would be in his 40s. In 1937, Paige made a decision that nearly destroyed his career. He accepted an offer to play in the Dominican Republic for a team owned by dictator Rafael Trujillo. The offer was irresistible. Trujillo wanted to win the Dominican Championship, and he was willing to pay whatever it took. Paige was recruited by a government official named Dr. Jose Enrique Aybar, who also happened to run Trujillo's baseball team, Los Dragones. Paige recruited Josh Gibson, Cool Papa Bell, Sam Bankhead, and several other Negro League stars to join him. They arrived on the island expecting easy money and a tropical vacation. What they found was a dictator who did not tolerate losing. Trujillo was known for murdering people who disappointed him. Armed soldiers attended every game. When the team fell behind early in the tournament, Paige and his teammates understood that failure could have consequences far worse than being cut from the roster. Paige later joked that he had never played under that kind of pressure before. He pitched the team to a championship and got out of the country as fast as he could. The consequences back home were severe. Negro League owners were furious that Paige had stolen their best players for a foreign league. Owner Gus Greenlee, who had built the Crawfords around Paige, sold his contract to the Newark Eagles. Paige refused to report. He was essentially banned from organized Negro League baseball. He drifted to Mexico, where he pitched until disaster struck. His arm gave out. The shoulder that had propelled thousands of fastballs simply stopped working. Suddenly, the greatest pitcher in black baseball could barely throw. He was 32 years old, and his career appeared to be over. Nobody wanted a pitcher who could not pitch. For the first time since reform school, Satchel Paige had nowhere to go. In 1939, the Kansas City Monarchs offered Paige a spot on their B team, a traveling barnstorming squad called the Kansas City Travelers. It was the bottom of the barrel for a man who had been the highest-paid player in the Negro Leagues. He could barely pitch, so he played first base most of the time, throwing the ball underhand because his shoulder could not handle overhand motion. The other players looked at him with pity. Satchel Paige, the great fireballer, reduced to playing first base on a farm team. But the Monarchs trainer, a man everyone called Jew Baby Floyd, began treating Paige's arm with a special liniment. Nobody knew exactly what was in it. Floyd guarded the recipe like a state secret. Night after night, he rubbed the mysterious potion into Paige's shoulder and elbow, massaging the damaged muscles and tendons. Slowly, impossibly, the arm came back. First, he could throw without pain. Then the velocity started returning. Then the movement on his pitches sharpened. Within months, Satchel Paige was pitching again. Monarchs owner J. L. Wilkinson immediately called Paige up to the parent club. By 1940, Satchel was the ace of the Kansas City Monarchs pitching staff, throwing as well as he had before the injury. It was one of the greatest comeback stories in sports history. The arm that doctors said was finished had somehow been resurrected. He led the Monarchs to the 1942 Negro World Series against the Homestead Grays, who featured Josh Gibson and Buck Leonard, two of the greatest hitters in Negro League history. The series was played in neutral sites across the country, from Washington to Pittsburgh to New York to Philadelphia. Paige appeared in all 4 games and won 3 of them. The Monarchs swept the Grays in 4 games. Satchel was once again the best pitcher in black baseball. He was also the biggest attraction. The annual East-West All-Star Game, the Negro League's showcase event, drew unprecedented crowds, and Paige was the primary reason. Fans voted him to the All-Star team 6 times. In 15 All-Star innings, he posted a 0.60 earned run average. In 1944, he posted a 1.01 earned run average, perhaps the finest season of his career. When Major League Baseball officially incorporated Negro League statistics into the record books in 2024, that number became the 3rd lowest single-season earned run average in all of baseball history. Only Dutch Leonard in 1914 and Bob Gibson in 1968 were lower. Through it all, Paige kept barnstorming. He estimated that he traveled 30,000 miles a year. He pitched in the United States, Canada, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Venezuela, Mexico, and the Dominican Republic. In the Puerto Rican Winter League, he set records that still stand, going 19-3 with 208 strikeouts in 1 season. His career numbers, though impossible to fully verify because Negro League records are incomplete, are staggering. By his own count, he pitched in approximately 2,500 games, won around 2,000, threw roughly 300 shutouts, and 55 no-hitters. Even if those numbers are exaggerated, even if you cut them in half, they represent a career unlike anything baseball has ever seen. Then, in 1947, everything changed. Jackie Robinson broke the Major League color barrier with the Brooklyn Dodgers on April 15th. Suddenly, black players could play in the big leagues. Larry Doby followed Robinson into the American League with the Cleveland Indians later that summer. The dam was breaking, but there was a cruel irony. The players who benefited first from integration were young men. Robinson was 28 when he debuted, Doby was 23. The Negro League veterans, the men who had been the greatest players in black baseball for decades, were now too old to start major league careers. The injustice was doubled. They had been denied the chance to play in their prime, and now they were being passed over in favor of younger men. Satchel Paige was 41 years old. Most people assumed his chance had passed. He had been the greatest pitcher in the Negro Leagues for 20 years, and now he was going to watch younger men reap the rewards of a door he had helped pry open through his barnstorming exhibitions against white players. Bill Veeck did not agree. Veeck was the owner of the Cleveland Indians, a maverick who loved breaking rules and making history. He was also a man of genuine principle who believed that the color line had been baseball's greatest shame. On July 7, 1948, Satchel Paige's 42nd birthday, Veeck signed him to a major league contract. The salary was $40,000 for the remaining 3 months of the season. Paige became the 7th black player in the major leagues and the oldest rookie in baseball history. The Sporting News was outraged. Their editorial column declared that Veeck had gone too far in his quest for publicity. To sign a pitcher at Paige's age, they wrote, is to demean the standards of baseball. Veeck responded simply and devastatingly. He said the real farce was that Paige had been kept out of the majors for 20 years because of racism. If anyone had demeaned baseball, it was not Bill Veeck. 2 days later, on July 9th, Paige made his major league debut for a Cleveland team locked in one of the tightest pennant races in American League history. He was the oldest rookie in baseball history. He was also the first black pitcher in the American League. He won his first game in relief. Then he kept winning. In 21 appearances that season, Paige went 6-1 with a 2.48 earned run average, 2 shutouts, and 3 complete games. He struck out 45 batters in 72 innings. "I ain't as fast as I used to be," he told reporters, "but I'm a better pitcher. I used to overpower them. Now I out-cute them." He drew enormous crowds everywhere he pitched. On August 20th, over 72,000 fans packed Municipal Stadium in Cleveland to watch him pitch, the largest regular season crowd in American League history at that time. People who had never been to a baseball game came out to see the legendary Satchel Paige, the man they had heard about for 20 years but had never been allowed to watch in a major league uniform. The Indians were in the middle of one of the tightest pennant races in American League history. Every win mattered, and Paige delivered. His 6 victories were not just statistics. They were the wins of a man who had waited his entire adult life for this opportunity and refused to waste it. The Indians won the American League pennant in a 1-game playoff against the Boston Red Sox. They went on to defeat the Boston Braves in the World Series, 4-2. Paige pitched 2/3 of an inning in Game 5, becoming the first black pitcher to appear in a World Series. He did not allow a run. He was 42 years old. He had finally made it. The rookie, who was older than half the managers in baseball, had won a World Series ring. Paige pitched for the Indians again in 1949, going 4-7 with a 3.04 ERA. When his contract was not renewed, he returned to barnstorming and the minor leagues. It looked like his major league career might be over after just 2 seasons. Then Bill Veeck came calling again. In 1951, Veeck bought the St. Louis Browns, one of the worst teams in baseball, and immediately signed Paige. It was a reunion between the two men who had proven the doubters wrong in Cleveland. His best major league season came in 1952, when he went 12-10 with a 3.07 ERA for a Browns team that lost 90 games. Think about that. A 46-year-old pitcher won 12 games for one of the worst teams in baseball. He was named to the American League All-Star team, standing alongside the best players in the game, at an age when most men have been retired for a decade. He made the All-Star team again in 1953 at 47. On August 6, 1952, Paige pitched a complete game shutout against the Detroit Tigers. He was 46 years old. No pitcher that age had ever thrown a shutout in the major leagues. It was further proof that the man was operating outside the normal boundaries of human athletic achievement. After the Browns were sold following the 1953 season, Paige was released. He returned to barnstorming and minor league ball, pitching wherever anyone would pay him. In 1961, at 55 years old, he pitched for Portland in the Pacific Coast League and struck out 19 batters in 25 innings. Then came September 25, 1965. Charles Finley, the flamboyant owner of the Kansas City Athletics, signed the 59-year-old Paige for one final appearance. It was partially a publicity stunt. Finley loved spectacle, but Paige did not care about anyone's motivations. He had been pitching his entire life. One more game was just one more game. The event was called Satchel Paige Night. Before the game, Paige sat in a rocking chair in the bullpen while a nurse rubbed liniment into his ancient arm. It was pure theater, vintage Satchel. The crowd loved it. The whole scene felt like something out of a tall tale, the kind of story that people tell around a campfire and nobody quite believes. But when Paige walked to the mound, the joking stopped. He pitched 3 scoreless innings against the Boston Red Sox. The only hit he allowed was a double to Carl Yastrzemski, who would go on to win the Triple Crown 2 years later and was in the prime of his career at 25 years old. Paige struck out one batter, opposing pitcher Bill Monbouquet. He retired every other hitter he faced. The crowd gave him a standing ovation. He tipped his cap and walked off the mound for the last time in the major leagues. He had now played professional baseball across 5 decades, from the 1920s to the 1960s. No other player in baseball history had ever done that. He had outlasted segregation itself. The world that had locked him out of the major leagues no longer existed, and Satchel Paige was still pitching. In 1971, Satchel Paige received the honor that had eluded him for so long. He was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame, the first player elected specifically for his Negro League career. There was initial controversy. Some felt that Negro Leaguers were being placed in a separate wing, rather than being treated as full members of the Hall. Major League Baseball clarified that Paige and all future Negro League inductees would be full, equal members of the Hall of Fame. They would hang on the same wall as Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb and Walter Johnson. At the ceremony in Cooperstown, Paige was characteristically philosophical. He had waited his entire life for this moment. He had spent 22 years in the Negro Leagues, watching white players with half his talent play in stadiums he was not allowed to enter. He had entered the major leagues 2 decades too late and still proved he belonged. He asked them to use his Negro League record on his plaque, not just his major league numbers. He wanted the world to remember where he came from. He wanted people to know that his career did not begin in 1948. It began in 1926, in a dusty Southern League, on a field that history nearly forgot. He never expressed bitterness about what racism had stolen from him. When people asked what he might have accomplished in the majors if he had been allowed to play in his prime, he simply shrugged. There was no point in looking back. Something might be gaining on you. After his playing days finally ended, Paige stayed connected to baseball in whatever ways he could. He worked briefly as a pitching coach for the Atlanta Braves in the late 1960s, sharing his knowledge with a new generation of pitchers who could scarcely believe the stories he told about the old days. He appeared in a Hollywood film called The Wonderful Country in 1959, playing a cavalry sergeant alongside Robert Mitchum. A television movie about his life, Don't Look Back, aired in 1981, starring Louis Gossett Jr. as Paige. He published his autobiography, Maybe I'll Pitch Forever, in 1962. The title captured his attitude perfectly. He had been pitching for nearly 40 years by then, and he still was not ready to stop. The book told the story of his extraordinary life with the same humor and philosophy that had made him a beloved figure wherever he went. In his later years, Paige lived in Kansas City with his second wife, Lahoma Brown, whom he had married in 1947. They had 7 children together. His first marriage to Janet Howard in 1934 had ended in divorce. Lahoma had been the stable force in his life after decades of wandering from town to town and team to team. She had given him a home. Paige suffered from emphysema in his final years, his lungs worn out from a lifetime of dust, exhaust fumes, and the endless miles of road that barnstorming demanded. A few days before his death, the power in his home was shut off because of unpaid electricity bills. It was a cruel reminder that even legends can struggle. The man who had filled stadiums with 70,000 fans could not keep the lights on in his own house. On June 8, 1982, Satchel Paige died at his home in Kansas City. He was 75 years old. He was buried at Forest Hill Memorial Park Cemetery in a special plot that the cemetery named Page Island, a fitting tribute to a man who had always been in a league of his own. The numbers Satchel Paige left behind are almost impossible to comprehend. Even the verified ones are extraordinary. His combined Negro League and MLB statistics, officially recognized by Major League Baseball in 2024, show a record of 124 wins and 82 losses with a 2.73 ERA and 1,501 strikeouts. His self-reported totals, 2,500 games and 2,000 wins, may never be confirmed, but they speak to the sheer volume of a career that spanned 4 decades. But Satchel Paige was more than statistics. He was a philosopher. He published his famous Rules for Staying Young in Collier's magazine in 1953, and they became some of the most quoted words in sports history. Avoid fried meats, which angry up the blood. If your stomach disputes you, lie down and pacify it with cool thoughts. Keep the juices flowing by jangling around gently as you move. Go very light on the vices, such as carrying on in society. The social ramble ain't restful. Avoid running at all times, and don't look back. Like and subscribe for more baseball documentaries. Until next time.